She just won a seat on the Wheeling City Council and is the first openly transgender person ever elected to public office in the history of West Virginia. Please welcome Rosemary Ketchum. Thank you for being here.
Hi, folks. Thanks for having me.
So congratulations on your race. Can you tell us a little bit about what you were campaigning for?
Yeah, so I was a candidate for Wheeling City Council in Ward 3, which makes up 4 neighborhoods. And a few of our campaign, issues included homelessness and vacant properties, potholes and stray cats, all of those fun local stuff.
You also, won this victory during Pride, first trans person elected in the history of your state. Can you talk a little bit about what that was like on the campaign trail?
Yeah, for sure. So I didn't know what to anticipate. I definitely didn't run as a trans candidate, but I didn't hide it. I've been working in my community as a community organizer for almost a decade, so people know who I am. But I had a lot of interesting first encounters, some awkward, most very kind and wonderful. I had one guy, I walked into a bar, as one does on the campaign trail, trying to get directions to find a specific space, and I had never been in this place before, and it was dead quiet when I walked in, kind of like one of those saloon movies where you walk in and it's like that. And me and my campaign team walked in, and they gave us directions very kind of quietly, and we walked out. And by the end of the night, we walked back in, or we walked to, get into our car, which we had parked in their parking lot without asking. And one of the, folks who was in the bar ran outside, yelling our name, and that's never a good sign. And so we're kind of terrified and scared. And he walked up to our car and said, "Hey, you are the worst politician I've ever met." And, I'm a new politician, and so it hurt a little bit. He said, "You never introduced yourself, first and foremost." Apparently they had a big discussion of whether I was a man or a woman inside the bar after I left. And he went on and on about that, and said that the whole bar wanted my contact information to learn more. And it was easily one of the most awkward experiences ever, but 100% kind and thoughtful, and I think the kind of definition of what local politics looks like.
I mean, that's a lot to bear. You're trying to campaign on these issues. I think you talked about homelessness, opiates, cats, the small town problems you want to take on. I think for a lot of people, trans visibility is new. You are sort of representing not just yourself, but the idea for people of being trans in a place like your town. How did it change you as a candidate, I guess is my question.
Yeah, so I guess I'm a people person at heart, and that makes it super easy because I'm an extrovert. I love talking to folks. I love helping folks understand what they might not understand. I work in mental health, so every day I'm, working with folks, trying to enlighten and inspire and do all those fun things. But running for office is very different. I've never had an experience like this. And I think running for local office is particularly unique because in this national landscape of convoluted politics we have now, and we've had, in some way forever, but particularly now, it is incredibly frustrating, and there's so much apathy and indifference toward federal and national politics because people realize how glacial change is and how frustrating, getting anything done can be. But I believe the more that we focus on our local politics, the more we realize the kind of untapped power of our mayors and city council members to make change in our communities, in our cities, so that we can all have little pockets of progress throughout our state. So when I kind of framed it that way, it was so much easier to run because it's like we have our own little state here in Wheeling, and we can really make progress on our own terms. So
I've been in a fight with some Harry Potter stands all day. And
bless your heart.
It's just a tweet. I don't know how much you've been following what J.K. Rowling has gotten up to, but she's put out obviously these abhorrent statements. But putting just this one person aside, this idea about what a real woman is something that people, even some people that consider themselves progressives, can seem to get behind even now. What, to your mind, is the harm of that kind of an idea, of the kind of arguments being put out there right now?
Yeah, so I think it's really important to kind of separate what we know to be ignorant versus what we know to be bigoted. And what I believe ignorance is just, the fact of just not knowing or not understanding, but trying to learn, maybe not getting it right. And bigotry is active hate and somebody who just does not care to learn or to be kind. So in J.K. Rowling's case, I haven't investigated all of it. I read Twilight. Don't hate me when I was younger, but I have a feeling that has more to do with ignorance. I speak at colleges, and I've had this past summer I got to speak at some of my first elementary and middle schools, which were the most intimidating but the most fun experiences that I've had. And just the language is really hard to understand for folks. The difference between a female and the difference between a woman. There is a difference, and the language we use is oftentimes mixed and convoluted. I have a story about going to the DMV for the first time and being refused an ID because the language on the forms didn't make sense. They weren't 21st century. And as a trans person who identifies as a woman but is not female, there's no box for me to check. So for folks who have never really had to consider the trans experience or what that means for a person who doesn't identify in that very rigid binary system, this language is really hard. It's like learning Mandarin for people. It's not easy to get right away, and so I try to be patient with folks, but Miss Rowling has a pretty large exposure, and so it's I think that much more important for her to at least try to get it right.
If she wrote this incredibly long piece, it does seem as though she has moved from this ignorant place to someone who's now done enough work to be considered someone who has decided to disregard the science, disregard the experts, disregard trans experience.
Yeah.
It does also seem to me that what you're describing, this experience at the DMV, that in many ways sort of trans people are on the front lines of a larger conversation about gender and the salience and primacy of gender itself. But I actually wanted to ask you about West Virginia too, because I was thinking about this, and that your story has become national news in part because it's even in West Virginia, oh my gosh, even West Virginia, this place, this place where it's not the city, they're rural, they're bumpkins, whatever the pejorative is, but there does seem to be some idea that the reason it's exciting that you won is because it's even in a place like West Virginia. You talked about the glacial pace of national politics. Some of what you talked about addressing as a city council member is about the failures of the federal government. What do you want people to know about some of the fights that are going on in West Virginia and the politics of West Virginia, given the kind of failures at the national level to tackle some of the economic challenges and societal challenges like drugs and what have you? Yeah,
so it's fascinating because we have, I think, in West Virginia, we're a kind of microcosm of what's happening nationally, because we have a governor who is in so many ways the Donald Trump twin. He's kind of like the the doppelganger, and we have a statewide opioid epidemic that exists across the country, but is I think really concentrated here in the state of West Virginia. And we have just at base we have a complete distrust in the systems that govern us nationally, but in West Virginia. We are very much a rebel state. We are the first, nation to secede from, the Confederacy, and we're proud of it. However, what we're seeing across the country with, the protection of, Confederate monuments and flags and statues is frightening and not, part of what we are here in the state of West Virginia. So that's all to say the stigma about West Virginia is often baseless, because the folks here are incredibly humble and compassionate. But the issues we have hit home for every single West Virginian. I don't think there is a West Virginian that doesn't know somebody impacted by the opioid crisis or isn't themselves, impacted. I have family members in recovery myself. And so from a city council perspective, you could think of it as unfair to try to take on the responsibilities that our state or our federal government should be taking on. But I see it as an opportunity to build trust, which is perhaps the most valuable currency that a local government can have, and to exchange with their community. And it's something that I've tried to build as a community organizer in my state, and hopefully now I can do the same, as an elected official.
Last question for you. There are trans kids right now. They are seeing things that J.K. Rowling is saying. They're also seeing your victory. They're seeing the progress. They're also seeing this bigotry that's out there. What's your advice to them? What's your message to them?
Yeah, so I would say it's not as hard as you think, and fear is not the boss. Oftentimes we are, controlled by what we're afraid of, and that makes sense. The world is kind of scary, and it takes a certain amount of vulnerability to do something like this, because you will not know what the consequences are until they're right in front of you. I didn't know I was going to win. I didn't know that Time Magazine was going to pick the story up, and that I was going to be talking to Jon Lovett. That 2 days ago I was excited about 2 retweets. So this is how fast it can happen. But I would tell a person or whomever's thinking about running for office that they should, because it's more efficient to replace elected officials than to convince them. And it's more fun, actually.
Rosemary Ketchum, thank you so much. Congratulations on your victory, and good luck.
Thanks, John.